Welcome back to another edition of the Friday Show presented by Woodbine. This Saturday, two stakes, the Hendry Stakes and the Princess Elizabeth Stakes on the all-weather surface. I'm Ray Paulick, happy to be joined by Editor-in-Chief Natalie Voss. Natalie, you took a little excursion, at least in cyberspace, out to Colorado and Arapahoe Park this past week for a story that it's like one of those crazy crime novels. Why don't you just kind of tell us the basic outline of the story first?
Yeah, so there are two drug positive cases that are working their way through appeals right now for a couple of trainers at Arapahoe who their initial tests came back positive for lidocaine. When the trainers requested split samples, they were told there are no split samples because there was a burglary at the test barn at the end of the 2020 Arapahoe meet. As far as I could figure out, there was probably a very brief investigation done by the commission and the county sheriff's office into that break-in. In the course of the break-in, the urine samples were defrosted, and the blood samples that were sitting there waiting, the split samples that had been gathered during the meet, the blood samples disappeared, the urine samples were defrosted and rendered useless. So there basically were no more split samples at that point from anything prior in the meet. The commission pursued the cases against these two trainers anyway, which seems like sort of an unusual move. They handed them some pretty heavy penalties and actually on appeal increased the fines for both trainers from what the hearing officer had originally assigned them. And, you know, as you sort of look back in the history of Arapahoe's test barn, it isn't the first time that they've had a problem as far as securing the split sample evidence and chain of custody. So it's just kind of an interesting little rabbit hole to fall down.
So I have some questions, and I think they were answered in this story, but for the people who haven't read the story, and I recommend they do, first of all, the test barn is secured. Is that right?
Well, the test barn is supposed to be, I think, a little bit more secure than it sounds like. It has been at different times in its history. What's supposed to happen is that the split samples are collected from the horses in the barn, and they're brought into this sort of office area where there are fridges and freezers, and that's where everything is stored. It remains there until there is a drug positive and a split is requested. Then it's taken out of storage under the supervision of the horsemen concerned and the commission and sent off for additional testing.
And the freezer is locked, correct?
Yeah, so there are two padlocks on each fridge and freezer, and one key belongs to somebody at the commission, and one key is held by somebody with the Horsemen's Association. They're supposed to both be there at the beginning of each day to lock it up, or to unlock it. And theoretically, I think are supposed to be there at the end of the day to lock it back. But because they're padlocks, testimony sort of revealed most of the time, whoever's left in the office just sort of pushes the padlocks close and leaves.
And you can break a padlock, right? With certain kind of equipment.
Bolt cutters, it sounds like, is what they thought were probably used. Somebody had removed a window from this office. And very carefully placed it on the ground. In fact, one of the investigative reports said, they didn't even damage the window. We popped it right back in the frame, which of course meant that somebody touched it to put it back in the frame. And they used bolt cutters to cut the padlocks off the fridges and freezers.
So I found out last year that you can buy security cameras for like $30, and the company that you contract with will send you alerts whenever there's any motion or anything like that. It's really not that expensive these days to have security cameras. What is the status of the security cameras?
So at the time of this break-in, there was one camera in the office. It sounds like the camera was working at one point earlier in the season. They would, the division of racing would ask somebody else sort of within their state's department or division, the IT people to verify that it was working. I think that was also a cooperative effort with investigators and security. At some stage, it was working. And then a couple of weeks before the end of the meet, somebody realized that it wasn't working. They notified one of the investigators, the commission investigators, hey, this seems to be broken. Do you want us to get somebody in here to make sure that it's recording properly? And they apparently were told, no, that's okay. We're almost at the end of the meet. We're not going to worry about it. So at the time the break-in happened, yeah, there was a camera there, but it wasn't actually successfully uploading a recording to anything. And it's unclear how many people might have known that at the time.
So who would want to break in and either steal or destroy test tubes and bags of urine and blood taken from horses?
Well, I mean, it would appear that somebody who thought they had a split sample in there that might not come back negative, a split sample that might come back positive for some, very serious substance, might have a motive to get in there and make sure that there was no split sample available. Previously, we know the same state has dropped cases where a split sample, for whatever reason, was destroyed or unavailable. So you might say that somebody who had a pending positive or who had an initial positive might have an incentive to do that. Or I guess it's also possible that someone who wanted to make it appear that someone with a pending positive had broken in might also have a reason to stage a break-in.
So there were some missteps here, it sounds like. What are some things that we can learn from this episode? Arapahoe is not a top shelf track. We don't really think about racing in Colorado that much, but there probably are some bigger lessons for other states here, aren't there?
Yeah, I mean, I think the easiest one is probably security for your test burn and your split samples. But I think what I was sort of struggling to understand throughout a lot of this was what seemed like fairly brief and not terribly substantial investigation that took place once this had already happened. I did a really broad Open Records Act request to try to get as much information as I could about what commission investigators had done once this took place. And I got back 5 pages. And it seemed like basically a couple of investigators showed up, looked around, went, well, this is bad, and called the county sheriff and said, well, this is yours now. And the county sheriff, in lieu of any physical evidence, since there was no surveillance footage and there were no available really surfaces to have fingerprints taken from, because the guys had touched everything in there when they came in.
The
investigators had touched everything when they came in, according to the sheriff's report. The sheriffs dropped it pretty quickly because they really didn't have a direction to go. They dropped it, in fact, the next day. So I think maybe having better procedures for investigators and security people and making sure those are actually getting followed would be a pretty key takeaway for any other state looking at this.
Well, I think there was another case similar to this in Louisiana 5 or 6 years ago. And I don't really remember what the outcome there is. It seems like a lot of these things just kind of go into a black hole and then you never hear about them. And that was a similar case. I think there were some suspects that had positive tests and lo and behold, the samples disappeared. So that's a convenient way to get off, isn't it?
Well, it is if it works. I mean, the sort of unusual thing in this case is they went forward with the charges anyway, and hit them with some pretty severe penalties. I think I think that the suspension, I want to say, was either 150 or 180 days. And initially they were told you have to serve that on racing days, not on calendar days, because Arapahoe is the only, parimutuel horse racing track in Colorado. They have a very short meet. So that would have actually, they calculated it out, would have been something like a 7-year suspension. They ended up walking that back and saying, okay, you can do calendar days, but we're going to delay the start of the serving of the suspension. These guys also appealed for a stay while they were pursuing their appeal. We're used to seeing that, where if there's an appeal ongoing, a trainer will say, hey, can you hold off making me serve the suspension in case this whole thing gets thrown out? That stay was denied. So even though their appeal is going on, sort of atypically, they are in the process of starting to serve that suspension at this point. So it's unclear if they'll even really get the appeal heard before they get to the end of their term at this stage.
And you said one of the positive tests, at least one of them, was for lidocaine.
They were both for lidocaine, a metabolite of lidocaine, I should say.
And that's the same. We do see lidocaine positives quite a bit around the country. And this is a great example, though, of how one state treats a case for a drug and a different state looking at the same drug treats it completely differently. The lidocaines are what Charlatan and Gamine tested positive for, I believe, in Arkansas, Bob Baffert's horses. And there was no disqualification, no suspension, just at the end, at least, after after the commission overruled the stewards. And in this case, it's pretty harsh.
Yeah, and it was interesting comparing the way those two cases were handled by the commission. It seemed to me that the commission in Colorado was very focused on the potential use of lidocaine as a numbing agent in a lame horse. And it's true, you would not want somebody putting lidocaine into a horse right before a race on an injected basis to try to numb an injury or something that could be highly dangerous to the horse and to the rider. There wasn't a ton of discussion, though, on sort of the other ways that lidocaine gets used therapeutically, whereas, of course, in the Baffert case, there was a lot of discussion about how that is present in topicals, over-the-counter human topicals. That was the whole explanation in the Baffert case, is this was an accidental contamination from a human topical. That really didn't come into play so much in this one. It was kind of a very sort of emotional reaction to the substance itself, it seemed to me, from the commissioners involved about, oh, you can't have this. This is dangerous. This is always bad. There wasn't really a ton of really discussion about like, well, you can't have this in here, so we have to punish you, but we're curious to see, was this inadvertent? How did this happen, basically? And I'm not saying that either approach is better or worse, but it just was very different from what we'd seen before.
Well, we've heard a lot of challenges to chain of custody in positive drug tests, not just in horse racing, but in human sports. I don't know that human sports have had a case where somebody actually broke into the organization doing the testing and stole the files. Now, during the Olympics, the Russians did something that was even more contrived. They actually took samples that were under lock and key, drill a hole through a wall, and took the old samples and replaced them with newer, cleaner samples. It was so. I don't think we've had that happen yet in horse racing.
Well, I'm not sure if we know. Has anyone been checking the drywall to make sure there's no holes?
That is possible.
I was sort of stuck on, obviously the point was to remove, any ability for somebody to test the splits in the barn, but I just kind of was a little surprised that whoever did it, didn't just sort of dump the blood vials in the sink like they did with the urine. What did somebody do with 200 vials of horse blood? I mean, I'm sure they just threw them out, but it just sort of creates kind of a cartoonish picture of somebody, running out with this tray of these little blood vials. Just kind of odd.
And completely unrelated to this, the United States Anti-Doping Agency is also located in Colorado, as is one of the major testing companies, Industrial Laboratories, which was involved in this case. So there's a lot going on in Colorado in drug testing.
Apparently so. Yeah. Who knew?
All right. Well, Natalie, thanks so much for taking us through this really bizarre story out of Colorado. And we'll be right back after we see who this week's Woodbine Star of the Week is.
And as they turn for home, Walliak's right behind them, out wide at Great Island, and a rails run to Keyflower. California Queen narrowly from Mutamakina, Walliak, and down the outside Family Way, Keyflower's up the rails, Mutamakina, California Queen, Walliak, and trying to run home is Keyflower on the inside, and behind them Great Island and La Dragon T. Mutamakina in front, Mutamakina from California Queen, La Dragon T flying, La Dragon T coming, Mutamakina's won it, Mutamakina from La Dragon T. California Queen is third. Behind them on the inside was Keyflower with Walliak and Great Island.
Hey gang, it's Bloodstock editor Joe Nevills entering the chat, and oh boy, we had a good fight here. A hard-fought win in the E.P. Taylor Stakes on October 17th earned Mutamakina the honors as Woodbine Star of the Week. There wasn't a step in this race where the horse wasn't doing battle, either with the German-bred California Queen on the lead or with La Dragon T coming from last to run second. But it only matters where you are at the finish line, and Mutamakina was in the right spot at the right time, won by a neck.
I love races like this. Flavian Pratt almost stole it on California Queen. The fractions of this race, the turf was yielding. They went 27 and change, 54 and change, 120 for 6 furlongs in a mile and a quarter race. And the other turf race on the card, in the Arctic, which is a turf sprint, they went normal fraction. So Flavian Pratt just walked this course with his horse and almost pulled it off. And then the runner-up, second horse trained by Christophe Clement, the winner and the runner-up, that horse was dead last through those slow fractions. Joel Rosario weaving through traffic in the stretch, and darn near got there. It was just a really exciting race.
I didn't check the gallop out. It sure looked like that horse was going to win the gallop out at the very least. Like that was really an impressive effort going forward to whatever that might be.
They don't pay the mutuals on the gallop out or purse money, but
that's true. I also want to shout out the mare's connections for knowing where to call their shot. Mutamakina has won twice at Woodbine, run twice at Woodbine, won both of them. She won the Grade 2 Dance Smartly earlier this year. She was ridden in both of those starts by Dylan Davis, who has had exactly 2 mounts at Woodbine for this meet. Both of them were graded stakes wins, both aboard Mutamakina. If you're going to ship north, you might as well make it count. This was also the first Grade 1 win for Dylan Davis, so congrats to him for that too.
Well, that was a really exciting race. That turf course, it's such a long stretch and a fair run for everybody. So that's our star of the week for this week. That's the Friday show for this week. It's presented by Woodbine. Got a couple of stakes on Saturday, the Hendry and a 2-year-old filly stakes, both on the all-weather. That's going to do it. We'll see you next time.